Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Fritz Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. This week we've got a special two-part episode featuring both members of one of my favorite bands, Wye Oak, in conversation with some other fantastic musicians, so be sure to stick around for both halves. First up, it's a chat between Wye Oak's Jen Wasner and singer-songwriter Johanna Samuels, both of whom have new music coming out, coincidentally, on June 23rd. Samuels has been making beautiful, deeply personal songs for the last decade or so, and her new one is a doozy. The album is called Bystander, and it was recorded with Josh Kaufman of Bonnie Light Horseman. He's the Josh you'll hear referenced in this chat. Samuels couches her powerful ruminations inside often sweet-sounding pop songs, but make no mistake, there's some deep thought and deeper emotion at play here. Check out a little bit of The Rest of Us from Bystander right here.
16 years old in 66, she met you in the quad, a lifetime of getting away with it. Ronnie, hold my hand, I'll help you to hang on.
Samuels is joined here by Talkhouse pal and alumni Jen Wasner, who's probably best known as half of Wye Oak, but has also recorded music recently under the name Flock of Dimes. She's also been a touring member of Bon Iver in recent years. It's no wonder that Wasner and Samuels get along, as both are incredibly thoughtful and sincere in their musical pursuits. They're looking for something much bigger than a hooky song to sing. They're out to connect on a deeper level. Wye Oak has sort of morphed into a different kind of band in recent years, choosing to stay away from the make an album then tour forever cycle, and instead release singles and one-off songs as Wasner and her musical partner Andy Stack are able. A bunch of those songs have just been compiled on an album called Every Day Like the Last, though if you didn't know they weren't a traditional album, you wouldn't be bothered. They sound as good as anything the duo has done, which is to say, they sound great. Check out a little bit of I Learned It From You right here. In this conversation, Wasner and Samuels talk about the magic of the Newport Folk Festival, how great it is to work with Josh Kaufman, and how to express heavy thoughts within joyful music. You'll find out whether they are women of mystery, and you'll hear Wasner refer to herself as, quote, a big golden retriever of a person. Enjoy. And stick around after to hear Wasner's Wye Oak partner Andy Stack in a separate conversation.
Hi there. How are you? Where are you now?
I'm in LA now.
Is this your home?
I guess so. I've been so hesitant to call LA my home, but it like 100% is where my apartment is and like my dog is. So I live here.
I'm curious what the hesitance is, if you wouldn't mind me asking.
Well, I was born in New York and then kind of grew up here. So I have all my childhood stuff here. Mm-hmm. So I have my like beef with the city, or just LA is so different from a lot of places, but I'm starting to love it now.
I think everyone I know who has grown up there in some capacity has LA baggage, but as a completely clean slate person, I have always loved it. And also sort of always dreamed about living there, but have never really been able to make the leap.
It's a beautiful life. I mean, I'm having a matcha right now.
Ooh. That is nice.
I think if you got the right people around you, you are like living in paradise.
Yeah, big fan. May end up there someday yet.
Give me a call. I'm here.
But I do love where I live in North Carolina. And I love being able to sort of fall off the radar a little bit in life in general. And the way I've kind of made that deal make sense for myself is to make sure I visit LA 2 or 3 times a year and just like really immerse myself in all the people and all the things that are happening. But I don't know, I become more and more of a recluse with every passing year. So
I get that.
Yeah.
It's a jungle out there when you're touring all the time. But yeah, every time I've come to North Carolina, I feel super like I can breathe in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm just like present in a different way.
Yeah. It's a very peaceful place to be in. And there's still a really lovely community here, like music community, creative community. But it's just a little bit more of a relaxed way of life. And I need all the help in like turning down my anxiety that I can get.
We talked a little bit about that at Newport, but yes, it's really nice to have your environment support your anxiety winding the fuck down.
Oh yeah, that's right. The last time we actually spoke in person was hovering around the free oysters. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Was that the first time we actually like officially met in person?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. You're one of those people who I feel like I know you better than I do, but we actually like haven't spent a lot of time in the same room.
I know. We have these like very brief, like very deep connective conversations. And then we're like, oh, I'll see you.
Yeah. I love that though. I love that there are some things I really fucking hate about the way that the world we live in exists, but being able to connect with people like that at certain moments is not one of them. Many of my friendships, very close friendships, have unfolded that way. Well, congratulations on your record. And you made the record with Josh Kaufman or
Josh Kaufman? Yes.
Gosh, I love that guy.
I know. They're our sweetest mutual friends. Yes, it was like the best experience ever.
He is a treat. Is it him doing all the super sick guitar solos on there too?
Of course.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Some real good guitar solos on that record.
Such a ripper. He's so like boundless with what he's down to try.
He just has that magical ability to kind of know where the parameters need to be to pull something off. And just like, use it creatively and tastefully.
A tasteful shredder.
Yeah.
I feel like if there's ever something that is a treat, like an ear treat, he's like, okay, we're going to take that and that's going to be all over the song, which is like, I feel like so many producers are like, and we save that for like this little moment. And he's like, no. If we love hearing it, we're going to just bloop it.
Yeah. I'm really struggling with making the next Flock of Dimes record right now. I'm like kind of in the dregs of it. And, it's like, the subject matter is really heavy. And I had this realization recently, and it seems like such a silly, like simple idea. But like, I've been writing all these really heavy, sad, sort of like grief-filled songs. And like the songs themselves have, kind of mirrored that energy. But then it occurred to me that like, what if I tried to lean into like just making the most joyful sounding music I could, like as an antidote to like the heavy subject matter, to sort of like bring some levity into it.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like it's kind of shifted some things around for me in the writing process where I'm like, it's like one of my favorite things about music is when someone can kind of pull off like a sense of levity or lightness or like sense of humor or like, and do it in a way that like kind of maintains the sort of like thematic integrity of the thing. You can still kind of like unpack all the dark, heavy shit you need to unpack, but you can do it in a way where it's like, it's sort of buoyed by the like joyfulness.
Oh yes. This is my favorite like topic ever. When I was really getting into music as like a teen, I mean, I was obsessed with the Beatles and all that, but I think even they achieved that. The Beach Boys are like a perfect example of that, where you're just like, this is like a perfectly packaged pop song that like you could just devour like candy, and then you like listen to it and he's talking about some of the darkest shit. And when I first started writing, I feel like I was super into like dirges. So it's like processing all my like angst.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Still am, but
you're not done.
Yeah,
you're
over
finished.
it. Yeah.
Everyone else has really got. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like there's like the power of the pop song, which is that you can actually talk about so many of the vulnerable things that it's so hard to talk about in life.
Yeah.
And then share it with people. And because of the beauty and the levity and the buoyancy of the music, you're connecting with them in your most vulnerable state.
Yeah.
And like receiving it.
Absolutely.
And the fucking shit.
It's just amazing how easy it is to forget that. Like, I'm always just marveling at my ability to forget everything I know and have to relearn it over and over again. And like, that's a big part. It's like this thing that I'm working on, I have sometimes I feel like having such a firm idea of what you're going for can actually be like a little bit of a hindrance.
100%.
Because it has sort of like felt a little dirgy to me, and like
I love dirge. Don't get
me wrong. Yeah, I love a dirge, but it's like it's just not always like what your intellectual brain's idea of the right direction or the thing that makes the most logical sense isn't always like the most impactful or exciting creative idea. And, you know, it's tough. I always sort of struggle with toggling between these two sides of my brain, because my intellectual, logistical, like rational brain is also very honed as like a survival instinct for like trying to fucking live in this shit world, like in a creative profession.
Sing it.
But then turning that off and trying to remember not to use those practical skills when you're trying to be in a creative space has still gotten really hard for me.
Yeah.
And I remember I was just on a plane on my way home from the West Coast, and I just picked up this Joan Didion that I hadn't read before. It's just like some essays. It's called Let Me Tell You What I Mean. And there's an essay in it called Why I Write. And she's talking about writing short stories or writing fiction, and how if she had known what she wanted to say and what was going to happen, she wouldn't have written a novel. And like, I think she uses the phrase like, you don't tell it, it tells you. Like, it tells you what it wants to be. And I just realized in that moment, I'm just like, oh, I'm trying to like reverse engineer this thing that I think is what I'm supposed to be making, but actually, like, I'm not listening. Like, it's trying to tell me what it wants to be. And until I let go of my idea of what I think it should be, I'm never going to be able to get to that place.
Totally. It's interesting. Like, I know we've like, not to get into Al-Anon, but like the idea.
No, let's
like,
do it.
going Al-Anon.
Yeah.
Well, just the idea of like, I have this medium and it helps me like reveal myself to myself. And that's something I can do. And that's something I can control. But then the irony of it is that when you're going into it, you actually do have to let go. There's like a surrender that you have to, like, it's the most humbling thing ever. And that's why it like, you like can grow through writing, I think.
Yeah. And it's why it becomes addictive. And it's why it's such a necessary practice, even if there's not necessarily like a point to it. And I think my anxiety manifests a lot as like the need to try and control my surroundings. And it's like I have to humble myself to it, right? I like to see myself as this like, oh, yes, I'm like a professional person and I can hit deadlines and I can do what I say I'm going to do because you should hire me because I'm good at all this stuff and I'm just going to do what. And then like coming to terms with the reality that like creativity doesn't function on the same timeline. And you can't control it and you can't force it and you can't tell it what it needs to be.
It's so crazy how we try to control it.
I mean, it's understandable given the world that we live in. Everything is terrifying. Everything is so scary. You know, I feel like I have been sitting with this feeling of like the first part of my life and now this part of and maybe this is some like midlife crisis shit. It might be because I'm like kind of approaching that zone. And I welcome it, truly. But at the same time, like, I've been really pushing back against this creeping feeling in my life that there was the first part of my life and everything was going well and everything was working out and doors just opened and everything was positive and light. And then like this thing happened, this like weird, scary pandemic, the realization, the like actual physical felt sense that like the world can like end essentially. Yeah. And now like, it's sort of like, I'm like, oh, and now is the time when my life gets hard and scary. And it's really just, I think that the manifestation of that felt sense that things aren't just going to like work out necessarily or be okay, but also moving into the part of my life where realistically speaking, like things do get harder and scarier. People get older, you lose people, you lose relationships. And it's also just a really hard, scary time to be in music.
In a lot of ways, it's inspiring because there are no rules. And the same way that we're realizing like the world could end, we're also like that also kind of inversely, I don't even know if that's a word, means that like anything is possible.
Yeah.
Kind of like, well, fuck it. Then I don't know. Like I'm going to do whatever feels right in my art.
I guess it's just a question of whether you meet it with hope or you meet it with resignation. And like, I can go dark on it pretty easy because, you know, I'm surrounded by like successful musicians who can't feed themselves. Like it's pretty dark when you're just like, wow, these people are doing all the things and succeeding. And it's like still increasingly impossible. But what I've been trying to do lately is just in all ways, but in this particular way as well, is sort of like trying to adjust the one thing that I can control, which is like the energy that I meet it with.
Yes.
And if I meet it with sort of like pissed off bitterness, which of course it's like sometimes I'm just like, man, this fucking sucks.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and I feel for so many people who deserve so much better with the work that they're doing. But, I feel like there are also just like these cycles that have always been unfolding, and like there's always been subcultures that exist and develop precisely because the gatekeepers for the sort of like more mainstream entry are too high and too restrictive. And so now I'm kind of trying to approach it from this place of like, okay, well, like if I'm a creative person, like how can I think creatively, not just about like the art that I want to make, but also like how I want to share it with the world and what is allowed and what's on the table, and like succeeding within the industry isn't possible, like what does succeeding outside of it look like?
And it's also, it doesn't even need to be like upbeat. It's like, well, this is what I have. I guess I'm going to go outside the gate. Like, and how many people meet out there? Like, if a bunch of us met, it could be really sick.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm toying with this idea. I don't even know what I'm quote unquote allowed to talk about on here, but I also don't care. But I'm toying with this idea. I'm trying to put together one of those like house show tours that, and like I've met so many people who have had such good experiences there. And so that kind of thing feels like if you can sort of build an infrastructure of people who like already know about you and care about what you're doing and want to support you, and like basically like find a way to have these more direct, immediate, like person to person, like small experiences, which honestly, as a performer, kind of sounds a little bit more appealing to me as well.
Oh, 100%.
I'm curious and excited about just sort of putting a little bit more on the table as far as like, what kind of experience do I want to have when I'm playing my music? And like, who is out there and how can I reach them? And how can we come together to sort of transcend a lot of the shit that's so limiting,
100%. And the more experiences like that I have, the easier it is for me to not be like upbeat and hopeful, but just kind of have that physical experience of connectivity and like, oh, like I made music and then I ate this like meal with these like amazing people, and I feel safer and I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I do think even for a fan, it's like the times that I've gotten to see people that I really look up to, just like in a living room or in a backyard versus like standing at a show and kind of feeling that like angst of, you're like, oh, wow, like they're in another world, like up there on that stage, and everyone's drunk around me and they're screaming over it. But,
Yeah. Well, and it's like there's some music that's kind of built to thrive in that environment and like built to like entertain and like the spectacle of it. And it's, I don't know, I think it's like, I love that those things exist and you can go see like a super crazy, like considered over the top kind of like pop performance spectacle.
100%.
People love that for a reason, but it's like not every artist is built to thrive in a scenario like that.
Totally.
But I think about the way I feel about performing, which is like a lot more complex and arguably like at times like really reluctant. And the things that I really am drawn to, what I'm drawn to the most about doing it is the actual like person to person connection of it, and sort of like getting to experience other people being like touched by the thing that I'm doing in real time, which is not something you get from just like putting an album out into the world.
Yeah.
And I think when the Flock of Dimes record came out a couple of years ago, I was so gung-ho about trying to play as many shows as I could, and it just became financially impossible.
Yeah.
And after that, I was just like, oh, I guess I just don't get to play shows anymore. And I sunk into a depression around it. And then I stopped writing, and it's sort of like, I think I forgot that part of it is also like, there's this whole creative ecosystem where if you just like start taking parts away, it doesn't necessarily function the way it is supposed to. And I remember this past New Year's, I went to the mountains with some friends of mine, and they were like, oh, Waz, play some songs. Would you just play a couple of your songs? We'd love to hear you play. And so I just kind of sat in the living room with my friends and just casually played through a couple of songs. And then 2 days later, like I wrote the first song I had written in like 6 months, you know?
It's like that animal instinct. Like we really just want to be seen and feel like we belong somewhere, even if it's in a living room with 3 people. That's the like actual fuel that forces me to write and want to share, is like that longing to connect, whether or not I felt alone or like I've felt lots of different ways in my life. But yeah, like we're like pack animals in a way. If you feel misunderstood or alone in whatever you're feeling, that's like the medicine.
I feel more hopeful now than I have in a while, as far as just realizing that what I'm looking for from the experience is something that I can create for myself, regardless of what avenues may or may not be available to me in this sort of like the more traditional sphere.
Yeah.
Are you planning on playing shows on your record, or how is that going to roll out for you?
I've basically just planned to like plop into my favorite cities. I'm playing in New York and I'm playing upstate New York. And I actually just talked to a friend about coming to North Carolina.
Ooh.
It could be anywhere. It could be in a living room. In the past, I've been so fixated on having it be legit and like having like, well, this person is doing it this way and that looks really glossy. So that's what I need to try and do, because I want to be a professional. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, wait. So I've been making music and playing it out for like over 15 years. Maybe that's what that, like, it's that pandemic realization where you're like, fuck it. Like, I don't like, I'm just going to make the music. And once I let go of that idea, I was like, oh, wait, Pitchfork might never review your record, girl. And then you're like, oh, I guess I don't care.
It's very freeing. It's very freeing.
I started to redefine what it wasn't like having these things, because in all honesty, I think I've gotten a lot of the things that I've wanted and felt horrible. And like, it's because I had the wrong idea of success. Like, and I'm now focused on what a successful life means to me. And I think I'm like older, honey.
I think we both might be, in many ways, a lot happier and a lot more in touch with who I am and what I need and what I'm looking for in relationship, in music, all of it. It just sort of feels like, yeah, it's a good thing.
I've thought so much about Newport. It was like my first Newport, and I just walked away from it. I was like, I'm going to talk about this in therapy for a long time. It was just like witnessing like a lot of dynamics and all the like dreams, like the icons that I was there for, but then also like these very like intricate kind of manifestations of the industry and how wild and weird it is. And then having moments where I was like, oh, I'm going to eat like 10 oysters with this awesome person. And then you told me this thing that you were like, we went back to our Airbnb and like Tim played music in the backyard.
It's like any festival, Newport or otherwise, it's like the most beautiful and the ugliest parts of the business are on display. It's very confusing and overwhelming to bear witness to all of it at the same time. But I remember what you're saying, because it was a really moving moment. The Tim you mentioned is Tim Bernardes, who is this really just unbelievable Brazilian musician who I just love. And it was getting to play a couple of his songs with him was one of the highlights of my year, probably. And then we got back to like the house we were all staying in, like Tim and our friend TJ and Joe, both drummers, were sitting in the backyard, and he was sort of teaching them these like sort of samba rhythms. And they were like listening to him sing the rhythms and then playing them. And he was just, playing it along on guitar. It probably was like 2 a.m. summer night.
Yeah.
Just all of us just sitting out there. And like every single one of us just had tears in our eyes.
Yeah.
Because it's just rare when you get that kind of a reminder of how little is required to actually have a transcendent experience.
Yes.
That like transcendence and beauty and connectivity is like, it's free and available to all at all moments. And like, you do not need the gatekeepers and the promoters and the everything else to sort of like create those experiences for you.
I look back on it and it was all the things we're talking about, and it facilitated that moment in a weird way. It really did bring everyone together, and like, it was just wild.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're in an Airbnb crying because you're having that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. It is true. It's a really good point that like everything that leads up to that is also part of creating that.
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. And I mean, I look back too, and as someone that has just like wanted to be like, to do that for so long, being on that stage and like saying, this is my first Newport. And I guess they really love when you say that. I should say that. I'll be like, this is my first.
Just keep saying it. Just keep saying it. Just lie. It doesn't matter. I want to see how long you can get away with
Newport. I'm like 80 years old. It's my first Newport.
Yay.
But I remember like my eyes welled up with tears because it was just so overstimulating and exciting. But like that was a beautiful moment.
And then also like we got to meet each other. And so that's
I know. Again, it's like the Instagram thing too, where it's just like, what a crazy little nutty kind of gnarly world. And then I've met so many people that I just adore on there. It's
it's both.
It's just like songs. It's both.
It's always both. It is always both.
Life is a Beach Boys song.
It is. It's so true, as it should be.
Maybe like a later era one.
Yeah.
Maybe a Sandbox era.
Life is Kokomo.
Yeah.
It's nice to talk to you about this stuff. And I feel like the more I talk to other musicians about what it's like to do it right now, the more comforted I feel. You know, it's like, it's just good to feel like you're not in it alone. You know, it's like, it's so easy to take things personally.
Of course.
But it helps to sort of realize you're not in it alone, and that like,
yeah.
And the only way we figure that out is by talking to each other. So
is by talking. There's this like cycle that I was talking about recently that's like, you like write a song, you share it with someone, or it's received by people. It feels really good. Then you're wanting to share it with more people, or you're wanting to do this next silly thing and what feels like should be done in the music industry standard. You feel really isolated and rejected personally. You feel like shit. And then you're like, oh, I'm alone. And then like, I'm going to write a song about that. And then it happens all over again.
Yeah. And you're never alone. And it's like everyone's sort of going through a similar thing. And everyone's projecting a version of themselves the way they would like to be seen by the world.
Oh, the Hall of Mirrors. Yeah.
Yeah. More than anything, I just want to disappear, quite frankly. I don't really want people to be seen or looked at. Or actually, this is something that could be interesting to talk to you about, too, because listening to your record, I feel like you do a thing really well that I've always been really curious about, which is you incorporate a lot of really incredible specificity into the way that you write. And I feel like I am such a private person, at least just like on a personal human level. It's like the same reason I struggle with something like Instagram is why I always want to sort of like make my songs feel a little bit more vague and impenetrable. But I'm really drawn to the kind of writing that's very specific and literal in these ways that feel very, very personal and vulnerable. So I don't really know what my question is, but I'm curious if you could talk about what it feels like to put pieces of yourself out into your work in that way.
Totally. Oh, this is so interesting because I just asked this question too. I took this like school of song.
I've always wanted to do one of those.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. They're so inspiring and they're just the best. But I took the Scott McMicken one. He took questions and I asked kind of this question about the like where the personal meets the universal and like what, because he's someone again that like, it's like you can have an aerial view of things and that is so profound. And then I think there's this like figure eight. I'm really getting heady.
I love it. Yes, I'm here for it.
It's like where the apex of the figure eight meets is like where it's the same. Like it's both like the most personal and then suddenly it's like the most aerial view, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I've always been told like, I'm sure this was like a put down, but like someone was like, you're not a woman of mystery.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And it's been my instinct. And as I've like learned to grow and protect myself to like save a little for myself and like not lay it out. And it's so funny because what I love about your music is how symbolic, like it feels like these huge, profound gestures because of the words that you use. Like it strikes a personal chord. It's weird. It's like for the opposite reason, I feel deeply connected to your songs because there's something almost like mythological about the way that you write.
Oh, thanks. No, it's really nice.
And what Scott McMicken said was that he obviously has to write from a personal place, but he always wants there to be a hatch. Mm-hmm. Like he never wants the listener to be stuck with like him.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that was very interesting for me because I think in the last record particularly, I started to really write personally. I wrote it during pandemic and I was like, well, no one might ever hear this. So I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
and then now I'm like, oh, it's coming out. Like I am like really serving myself up on a platter, and that's scary, but I kind of don't give a shit.
Yeah. Great. I love that. It's very inspiring.
Thanks. I think that that's like what it's, if you're being authentic and true, what is going to come out is more likely to connect to the listener, like, than not. And again, like in growing up, having people going like, you're like not a woman of mystery, like it in the same probably the same moment that I was like, oh, I'm like, I don't care if I'm on Pitchfork. It was like, yeah, I am. I'm not a woman of mystery. Like I'm like a weirdo and like I'm gonna just be that.
Yeah.
Then I started to kind of feel more connected to my songs.
Well, yeah. And I really am touched by that as well, because I think I've really struggled with the idea of like, I mean, I think sort of like the idea of what is cool, right? Is like in and of itself kind of a way that we disconnect from each other. And yeah, again, like there are a lot of people who are great at assembling these personas and cultivating an air of mystery and almost like performatively living their lives that I find really interesting and compelling. And it seems to be like a part of the way their art is expressed.
Yeah.
But if you ever meet me or talk to me, it's just like, I'm just like a big golden retriever of a person. I want to talk to people. I want to make them feel good. I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. And it took a while for me to accept that, like, the fact that I am the way that I am, it sort of makes sense that my music would be the way that it is. It's like, it's as a projection of how and who I am.
I'm glad you do it your way.
Thanks. I'm glad you do it your way.
Yeah. I mean, the music that you make makes me feel very safe in listening to it and understood. So it's like, you can come at it from any angle, but it's just like, yeah, this is so cheesy. Be yourself.
Yeah. I mean, for real though.
It was a lovely chat.
Yeah. It was so nice. I mean, I could talk about this shit forever and ever. I find it endlessly fascinating, and to get to sort of have a conversation with someone else who's also engaged with it in the same way, it's just like a real treat. So thank you.
Me too.
And congratulations on your record.
You too. I mean, I feel like I didn't get to really talk about I talked about your writing, but the new record is so fucked up good.
Oh, thanks. I feel funny. I mean, we're trying to do it with Wye Oak. It's so interesting because like we're trying to do it in a different way. Mm-hmm. Because our lives have changed so much that we can't really be a band the way we used to, but we still want to be something.
Yeah.
So like, a lot of the songs have been released already, and like there's new material, there's material from the past several years, but they all do feel very much like of a piece to me. They feel connected. It's just that sort of the way we introduced them to the world was kind of non-traditional. Uh-huh. And it's so funny. I feel like I don't pay too much attention or give too much stock to like what is out in the world, what people's reactions to things are. But, it's just like, why wasn't there like an album? Why isn't there like a whole thing? Like, I think people really get attached to these frameworks that are out there for like, and I understand I'm flattered by anyone wanting to hear more music from me. But at the same time, I feel like the way we're doing it is the way we need to do it to continue to survive and like to foster all of our other creative projects and also like our personal selves and lives. So I feel like I'm like, well, this is what we have. Like, and I'm really, I think it's like some of the best material that I have ever been involved with, period. I'm really, really proud of the songs.
In the second half of this epic Talkhouse two-parter, we've actually got 3 speakers. Andy Stack, who's best known as half of Wye Oak, but who's also made some solo records under the name Joyero. Along with him is Jay Hammond, with whom Stack recently made a great instrumental record, and Joe Westerlund. I'll start with Westerlund, and I'll try to do his bio justice. He started out in the Wisconsin band DeYarmond Edison, which has a massive retrospective box set coming out this year, and which is best known as the band that started Justin Vernon of Bon Iver down his musical path. Westerlund has also contributed to lots of other song-based music over the years, drumming for the likes of Caliphone and his project Megafaun. But it definitely feels like Westerlund has found his true calling in his solo instrumental work, including the recent Elegies for the Drift, whose compositions were largely inspired by important people in his life who'd passed away recently. It's a gorgeous, emotional ride. Check out a little bit of The Circle, which is dedicated to Akron family's Miles Cooper Seaton, a friend of Westerlund's who tragically died in a car crash in 2021. It makes sense that Westerlund got together for a chat with Andy Stack and Jay Hammond because they all have North Carolina in common. It's become something of a refuge for a bunch of bands over the past few years, with their friends in Sylvanesso building a studio there, and lots of folks, including both members of Wye Oak, now calling it home. Stack and Hammond got together recently and struck gold with a series of electro-acoustic improvisations that they winnowed down to album length and titled Interpersonal, a nod to the connection that they deepened by making this music together. Check out a little bit of Life on a Ship right here. These 3 guys talk about converging in North Carolina, about how giving instrumental songs different titles can be a powerful thing, and how experimental music can often offer just as great an emotional connection as songs with lots of words. Enjoy.
We talked about wanting to talk to somebody about this stuff we've been making, and you were the first person that came to mind because we know what you've been doing and respect what you've been doing. We've also both collaborated with you this way or that.
Cool.
When we got together and made our record, and then also as we were sort of sifting through after the fact, we spent a bunch of time trying to make sense of what it meant to us and what the music sort of represented for us. I don't want to say creating meaning after the fact, but sorting through our own feelings. The record kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah,
we didn't intend to make one. We just did that. And where we ended up with it after sort of a process of batting around all these just sort of
very abstract ideas.
Yeah.
About geometric shapes or
this is after the music
after the music
happened? Okay.
when we were starting to think about how do we present this. We were just
thinking about where we made the record, natural themes, of having been out in Western NC in the mountains, and where we ended up with it was that for us the process of making the record and just basically the process of collaborating in general was a practice of deep intimacy between each other.
Absolutely.
And that was sort of the whole purpose of the session that we did in the first place. It was let's bring some instruments and we'll play a little bit. But more than that, it's let's just hang.
But it was at an artist residency?
Yeah, Wild Acres. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where?
In Little Switzerland, North Carolina, outside of Asheville. Yeah. Give you a cabin and they feed you 3 meals a day, and you just kind of can do whatever you want with that.
I did a week there on my own in summer of 2021, and the whole place was shut down. Usually there's residency groups, retreat groups there, doing pottery or yoga or something like that. And at that point they hadn't reopened, and it was like The Shining or something, this big hotel on the side of a mountain. and I was just like wandering through like empty hallways.
Wow.
And it tripped me out a little bit. I think like that kind of isolation it does weird things to my brain. And then at the end of this session, their like whole schedule had gotten all fucked up by COVID, and the director of the residency program was like, there's a bunch of extra slots available. If you just want to come back, you're welcome to come back anytime. So so Jay and I like set up just a hang basically.
Yeah, I remember you came out to visit us in Asheville, and we were taking a walk, like a long hike with our partners. And I remember you were like, you want to just come out and we can just play and record it and hang out and see what happens.
In retrospect, I wish every record was made that way.
Yeah.
It was so much more personally rewarding to end up with a record where you didn't even know you had one. Not that like slaving over a record for, 6 months and then coming out with this like very polished thing is not rewarding in its own way. But I tend to come out of that process just hating everything about the record because I've lived inside of it for too long. And in this case, you have
to go play it 1,000,000 times on the road after that.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And in this case, it was more like we were just having fun and came to the end of it and we're like, oh, this is actually a thing that doesn't feel like a waste of hard drive space.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, and I think what I was saying before, how our when we realized we had a record and we wanted to put it out, we were like, well, when we were initially thinking about how to present it, it was very much more like in the vein of like how experimental music is like marketed often, which is in this very sort of cold, abstract way. When we were talking about doing something like this, we were like, well, Joe's always making beautiful experimental music that is very emotionally connected. It's very much about like the body and about like connecting to your, this record you just made is about connecting to your grief, but it's always like, it's not, experimental, the kind of experimental music world is often like very cold and almost like, it presents itself both on stage and in kind of press or whatever as kind of the antithesis to that.
Sort of like void of emotion.
Sometimes. Yeah. I mean, you think about like Lamont, even like minimalism or like the Dreamhouse Lamont, like all like even like Brian Eno, like all that stuff. I love that stuff, but it also there's like a real coldness to it that is not.
You don't think of like really warm, fuzzy feelings when you think of Brian Eno?
I think that sometimes the culture around that music is very like, it's like just get in your own space and kind of get in this very solo kind of headphone listen kind of like space. Whereas, I don't know, I think like, I like thinking about experimental music as a way to connect with people,
right?
And also a way to connect with your own emotions and.
That's always been a big thing for me, as like the connection part of music. And I think that something that the three of us have in common is that we do other music that's like song based for whatever reason, like songs, probably because they have words part of them
and melodies
as part of them and melodies. But y'all's record has melodies. My record has melodies.
Yeah.
But there's like, I think that there's something in that zone of music making, that lends itself more to like connection with an audience. That
you mean the song based
stuff.
Yeah.
And I think just having even for me, it's like, I don't write songs anymore, but like I work with a lot of people that do write songs, and I've worked with you with your songs, like there's an attitude or an approach or a delivery, or there's all this stuff. There's all of this stuff baked into it that kind of, when I make my own music, I try to tap into that more so than the other side of me that kind of like went to, art school and, studied a bunch of like heady compositional stuff that I love, that also like strikes a chord with me, but like often isn't presented in that way or isn't like experimented with or like discovered for oneself in that way. I've always tried to let the other side and the emotions in, you know, and let that guide the piece, and more things like intuition than like trying to like trick myself out of doing the same thing over and over again or something.
I don't know, pop music in a sense is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Right.
That, I mean, I certainly came up on that. We were just talking about like that, you know, in some way we're all kind of novices in this like experimental zone. I think emotional vulnerability is like the touchstone for me, especially in recent years. Maybe that's part of like becoming a more mature artist, is like becoming more comfortable with allowing for that.
And being an older human.
Like, well, you've like fallen down enough times, and I'm curious that's one of the things that I'm really interested in with your record, and that I see a parallel with ours, and I don't necessarily have an answer or have my head totally wrapped around it, but is like what is the process, or what is the experience of like deep emotional vulnerability in instrumental music?
Totally.
Because it's not like a linear path to that, you know? And it's, I guess, compared with like pop music with songs, it's like a much more subjective experience, both for, you know, the people making it and for the listener, of like what constitutes vulnerability, what constitutes grief, you know, what is it that constitutes grief in your music? I don't know. Like, I'm curious, like where that came from for you with your record. Or, I mean, I know the story of, the folks in your life who passed. And you know, I understand the sort of context of that, but I'm also curious, like, for you, like as a practicing musician, as somebody who I know that you have sort of like a almost meditative practice with your music on a regular basis. And, you know, how did you personally like set yourself up to be making this music?
I think because I was going through so much grief and change while I was doing my daily practice with it, you know, and while I was creating it. So it just like came out naturally. And, you know, I could have just picked different titles and said it was about different stuff, probably. After, you know, and like
totally.
No one might not know the difference. I mean, I've talked to William Tyler about that sometimes, where he's just like, that's the fun. You can call instrumental music anything.
Right.
You call
it's really
you know?
easy to shoehorn like kind of significance onto instrument.
Yeah.
It's sort of
you can have like like different like test subjects, like release it like screenings of movies to small audiences to see how they respond to
it. I've just felt, since my record is out now and in front of people, and the feedback that I've gotten like directly from friends and everything has been like, what, you know, it's been varying degrees. Some of it has been given to people before we even had like a bio and the story behind it. And I kind of got the same reaction from people that, oh, this is really beautiful. This is perfect for my walk in the woods that I do every week or every day or something, you know. And this is a good soundtrack to this particularly like challenging thing I'm going through right now, or my mood, you know, today, or, you know, that stuff is real and can't be faked and can't be like tricked out of, you know, with titles or anything, or like a storyline attached to a piece of music,
a press release.
I have gotten the like notes from strangers over DMs and stuff now that are just like,
wow,
oh, like, you know, I lost my son last year, and this is like crazy, you know, like just a perfect thing and a really difficult thing to go through, but I get your sentiment.
When you're trying to understand what instrumental music like is, I'm doing air quotes, like, you know, I think it's cool that it came out of this daily practice and it was very much in this time when you were experiencing all this grief, but I don't know, there's this like integrity between the process of making it and then like the process of presenting it. they're connected, which is hard, I think. Yeah. Because you can make instrumental music be like about anything. You could say anything about it.
I think it came down to the closer I got to being done with each piece, they were like really tied to me, to specific people.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And so then that would kind of show me, or experiences, and that would kind of show me what more I could do with it. And like, so there's a piece where I dropped Miles' voice, like an old recording of Miles' voice, into it as like kind of a sample. You know, it was like trying to make it really obviously feel like a sample. Like I even, you know, it was recorded on nice microphones and everything, and I threw it onto my cassette, you know, because I wanted it to evoke that.
Yes.
What, for me, the experience of hearing his voice back now is like, feels like the cassette.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So then it just kind of like snowballed into like all those pieces together, you know, because I was working, I had like 10, 20 more pieces of music that like didn't fit into that category really of pain, sorrow, grief, meditation, or, you know, like healing or something. So
that's for the next of the trilogy.
Yeah. The trilogy. Yeah. Right. So that just, I think just my own personal connection to what I was making started to really show me what it was, and that I could name this thing after those specific people or experiences or whatever.
And it felt like true to you.
There's kind of a visceral connection to that, you know, that process of naming or of meaning giving. Like, if it's not something that personally connects with you, then like it feels kind of icky. It feels embarrassing almost to me. Like, to think of like when we were working through the process of, you know, editing down our record and thinking about what it meant, we were sort of like playing with record titles and project names and stuff like that. And like when we found this feeling of like, well, let's just like double down on like this deep personal friendship and relationship that we're in, everything suddenly felt like it was elevated and like it couldn't have been any other. Like we were recording, you know, a few hours a day, and it was all improvised more or less. We were doing that a little like, you know, giving each other prompts or like very basic ideas of sort of like the arc of the thing. But yeah, we came out of it with probably 2 or 3 hours of recordings, and yeah, I mean, it didn't feel like there was a ton of like fat to cut. No. Like it felt pretty clear what the record was, and the nice thing was it like it was very tidy. It fit into like the perfect sort of like record length, and all the pieces that went on just felt like they belonged together. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. From listening to it, all hangs together very nicely.
Yeah.
And it evokes how you guys have presented it, the music itself, you know, like I listened to it. I've been having like trouble sleeping in the last like, well, probably forever, really. But like
me too.
But I think it's like classic, like, oh, you're getting older, you know, you're like approaching middle age, more in middle age, and you're like,
it becomes
I've been
more
waking up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and can't get back to sleep for an hour and a half.
Oh,
and like,
same, man.
There was a big part of me that was like, I need a watercolor painting helped me relax. And it was like, you know, I think in my mind, I was always like, I should get up, and I wish I had a studio so I could just get up and go to it and not disturb, you know, my partner or whatever, you know, and play music. That's how I should spend this time. You know, that's like how you hear like great composers, like getting up in the middle, and they, you know, they have insomnia and they write like Elliot Carter or somebody. I don't know. I feel like I heard that story in composition class over and over again. Yeah. You know, but like, so painting sort of like filled that gap for me for a while of like, that's what I would do, and it would actually soothe me and help me like go back to sleep.
That's cool.
But
it's so much more productive than what most people do with their insomnia.
Well, I'm not, I don't stick to it as much as I should. Lately, especially, I think there's there's just, you know, you go in phases of stuff and like you get really into something and then you're kind of like,
yeah.
So lately it's been, I'll just put my earbuds in and like listen to music and,
oh, cool.
And like, but like this kind of music,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So like y'all's record is like, I did that with it last night.
Oh, cool.
And then I did it again this morning when I was like getting ready for the day, you know. It's like I like those
good times of day for that music.
Yeah, there's like a focused one, you know, where I was like just laying in bed, you know, and like trying to get back to sleep, but like listening. It's a focused listen. That's like a great way to use music like this.
I wanted to ask you about your painting. It's interesting you brought it up because it feels like so perfectly in tune with your other like creative output and just your personality too. I really love your painting, and it also feels like your music sounds in a lot of ways.
Cool.
And I don't know, like it sounds like it came out of a very different place than maybe your music practice. Like it maybe was from a place of like needing something. You were needing to like, I don't know, repair something that was lacking. In this case, sleep. But like, I don't know. Like, I'm curious if it feels connected to the music practice, or if it feels connected to like the sort of like emotional core of the of your music.
It certainly does. Like, it feels connected to understanding process, and like universal rules. Like, oh, I crowded it. I did too much, or like. I didn't do enough, you know, like I left too much space, or I'm not listening enough. I'm not looking at it enough. Like a lot of times, more time I'll spend just looking at it before I like do anything. Like I'll just sit there and stare at it and like maybe imagine doing stuff to it. Probably like you do when you're like making a song or multi-track.
Yeah,
or,
like mixing or producing
layered
stuff. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
layered recording. You're kind of like listening back to it so many times, and that's how we like get sick of it. But it's also how you like, just imagine what else does it need, or what do I need to take out of this,
right?
You know. So
although also like your paintings and your music feel so spontaneous. You know, that's an interesting. I don't totally understand how you do it, to be honest. Like specifically in your music, it's like you're talking about process and about like being really thoughtful about where you're placing everything, whichever medium you're talking about, and yet like it feels very immediate and spontaneous. And so that's.
I mean, that makes me think of like the Kinshasa ones, like the stuff from the trips that you took, because aren't some of those like recorded kind of jam sessions that then you took back and changed, or like how did those?
Oh no, in my record, no, just inspired by.
Inspired by,
yeah. But I do have some recordings of like the lesson that we did in the jam, but no, I didn't use those.
That's crazy. See, that's exactly like cool. It sounds like the spontaneous thing to me.
Interesting.
Yeah,
we have Simone, my wife, and I have this series of portraits which you saw, which are like. We were using like that. We did them on our second date with each other, and they were like, what's it called? Blind contour drawings. Do you know that? Where you're drawing someone. It's like a portrait of someone, but or you know, of a subject, but you're not looking at the page at all. You're just only looking at the subject. And, and so we did that of each other, and it was like these really fucked up versions of our of our faces. But then we came back to the process and sort of like polished it, and so
you like collaborated on.
We collaborated on it, but
they both look like they come from the same. They do.
They definitely belong together. I've seen you perform, and I'm like, it feels like you're spinning plates a little bit, like you're doing like a million different things at once, and I don't totally even understand like where some of the sounds are originating or how they're getting like processed and kind of chewed up.
Yeah,
and I don't know whether that's what I'm hearing or whether there actually was like a lot of sort of like multi-track development going on with a lot of this stuff. But like it feels like a ton of the material is like that. It's like or something that originates with like pure improvisation, pure creative like splatter paint.
Yeah.
And then you end up with like these layers of depth with it.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. And yeah, your painting's the same way, it sounds like.
Yeah. It always, like, the painting starts with, usually, one way it can start is, just like a state of mind, like I get into a state where it feels like there's some intuitive sense and logic to, like, a splatter, or just like dropping something on the paper. And I think that's how the music starts too.
Yeah.
But then there's a series of working with what's there, working around, adding things around it to give that initial, like, impulse context. You're the editor, but you are kind of like giving reverence to this thing that was, like, based on impulse. So it becomes this mixture of editing, self-editing, while you're still trying to stay in this state of, like, intuitive logic.
Yeah.
I like that way, like, to give it reverence, to give that moment of, it's like this there was a very particular feeling when I just kind of splattered this paint, whether it's paint or sound. And now a certain amount of that is as it is, but I do have some agency in the editing process to, like, shape it and, like, frame it. It's almost like framing it, maybe, or kind of like,
framing is a great word, I think. So I have a question for you guys about your record, because, like, what we were talking about a minute ago with, like, the experience of being there and how it seems like that fed into the music itself, just like you guys are having kind of an introspective time, but together, and, like, kind of looking at your lives and, like, still keeping your regular lives going, like you're working, but then you're, like, you have this kind of relaxing moment of going on walks together and then, like, playing together and recording and making something you don't know what, which is also, like, an extremely luxurious process to go through. Like you were saying at the beginning of this, I feel like there's more people making records under that guise of, like, I don't know, it's us and we just go into the studio and we do something, like I've felt that happening a few more times with people that I don't normally experience with that since the pandemic, right? Yeah. Like, just people kind of like, let's just book studio time.
Yeah, people being like,
whatever the fuck happens.
Yeah, nothing matters anymore. So let's just enjoy it.
Am I right in assuming that is kind of like what you latched onto with, like, what do we call this and how do we present it and what is it? It's instrumental music, but what is it about? Or like, how do we want to shape people's listening experience further with this? Like, did you feel, so I guess that's a question. Did you feel that reflection between those two things, between your experience there and, like, the music that came out?
Yeah, definitely part of it. Like, like when I hear, like, Logging Road from the record, I feel like that one really makes me think about that place.
Okay. That was going to be one of my questions, actually.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, what's Logging Road?
Yeah. I mean, it just is, it was this very twisty-turny mountain road kind of a place. And I think, like, there's that one, so that, to me, they don't all evoke, like, the place was where we kind of, our friendship deepened and where we made this record and where we now are on this, like, adventure of putting a record out together, which is a whole other, we've got a record label, we've got people helping us do it, which is a whole other, our friendship is deepening now because of that process.
I think that when I think about the themes of this record, the subject, and when I think about, like, the art, the like textile piece that is the cover of the record, and some of the other, imagery that we've put, there's, like, this feeling of like tender work being put into personal connections, and the process of coming together and making music is like a nice sort of exemplification of that challenge, of that practice, and of that like aspirational act.
Yeah. It's almost like the vehicle for you having an experience between the two of you. You know, it sounds like, it wasn't just sitting in a room making music. It was like all these other things as well, you know, but like that, it was like the reason that brought you guys there. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I often feel that way.
Yeah.
About even if you're in recording sessions that last 10 hours in a day, it's still kind of like, it's like, I mean, we can say we want to make music and we want to make some money or, you know, or whatever, you know, put our name on a magazine or something, you know, like that. There's all, you can have all those reasons too.
Yeah.
But like,
it
is like kind of the hang seems to kind of be the most important thing, even if you're like, you know, under the gun and trying to like
even if
finish something up and working long hours and exhausted or whatever.
Usually if you can't get the hang right, then the other stuff is going to be going to suffer.
Right. And that's something that's really about music, you know, just hanging. I feel like I have more insight lately into just like other professions or like people making art in more solo ways. It's like, that's something that's like really unique to music. And even like, I don't know. I feel like there's just more, I mean, performance, I guess, is it all. Anytime you perform.
Right. Like theater, film is all like this hyper collaborative space. Yeah.
But like music is a little more informal too.
Yeah, true.
There's less rules.
But we're also ironically talking about a solo record that you made.
That too. Yeah.
And that's
but not you guys.
No, but I mean, I'm wondering about like, it doesn't feel like it doesn't still apply. Because also like your relationship to yourself is still a relationship that still needs tending. And the process of self-work is very similar to the process of interrelational work. But I don't know. I think like I was curious about like that sense of like how intimacy can figure into your music when you're making solo music, or like whether, you know, whether you're trying to approach working as a like solo composer the same way that you were talking about, like you got to get the hang right, even if you're just like hanging with yourself.
Right. Yeah. True.
I mean, that's meditation.
Probably.
That's meditation.
Probably did think about getting the hang right with myself. I mean, we all had a lot of time to hang with ourselves.
We sure did.
Yeah.
With y'all's record, was it like, because there's more, it's drums and guitar, but there's also like synths on it and stuff. Did you start with something that you were playing to sometimes, or did you add stuff later ever, or was it all just like
there was
live?
one tiny overdub that ended up happening, but almost everything on the record was live performed.
And so you're playing synthesizers and drums at the same time.
Sort of like what I've done with Wye Oak in the past.
Cool.
A lot of one-handed drumming, or like I was using this little like micro synth unit that has like some sort of like sample capacity to it, or like sequencing capacity and like arpeggiation stuff. So there was a good bit of like setting a thing and playing, and then, you know, one-handed playing and tweaking while, you know, and then going back to the full kit.
And I like trying to essentially figuring out how to perform it live. It's like we've treated these improvisations that then Andy also, we haven't talked about the editing mixing process that Andy went through, but then Andy did some of that. And now we're in this process of figuring out how to sort of reverse engineer those pieces into like a live performance.
What are you thinking about for live? Like, what is the conversation now?
Oh, well, we've done a few shows, and we've actually been we sort of worked up some of the material from the record, like a few of the songs, and so we'll do those, and then we'll just do like straight improvisation.
Yeah.
So the few shows we've done have been like maybe about half and half of material from the record, which of course is also like largely improvised. It's just that we'll sort of like have some sort of themes or starting points in a way, like we have on the record, and then it goes.
I mean, for we did one concert. I mean, it was like more of a formal thing. It was like an hour long, and we played 3 things from the record and did 2 improvisations, and that was like an hour. So.
It's a strange thing a little bit to take something strictly improvisatory and then like retroactively work it up.
It's hard. It's a challenge.
Yeah. Right. Are you doing that with your material? I mean, yours is not strictly improvised either.
Yeah, I don't know yet. I mean, because I haven't done the whole thing. I've done two of them before live, and I get bored with myself because I traditionally have like backing tracks that aren't like specific timing wise, but are just there, and they start at the same point every time, they end at the same point every time. And I'm trying to like break that up a little bit more and try to figure out how I can like, maybe I've got a looper now, and it's like maybe I make like an original loop out of some of this, like break up the backing tracks a little bit more so that I can like have a little bit more control over in the moment over the pad that I'm trying to create, that I'm gonna like drum over.
It's that struggle of like doing. You don't want it to be where like if you keel over in the middle of the show, the music will continue.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Milli Vanilli. So yeah, that's the code I'm trying to break right now. And my solve is to do a completely, like, I'm going to do this show in the nature preserve that's like just what I can bring out in a wheelbarrow and nothing electronic. And it's just going to be completely acoustic. So I'm just going to figure it out. And I'm probably going to flail around and fail a bit. But like also that's like part of it's just part of the challenge and part of the process for me always.
There's like one other thing that I was just kind of curious about, which is like just talking about North Carolina, since we've all kind of come here from afar.
Yeah.
And Joe, I think you've been here longer than either of us have. And
Wow. Yeah.
I guess it's been about 5.5 years for me now.
Okay.
But yeah, I was just wondering like how you got here and also what has kept you here. And, maybe just thinking about the scene or even just
I even left and came back.
So, oh, right. You went to LA, right?
It's been a magnet. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How long was that divorce?
5.5 years.
Oh, you went to LA for 5.5 years?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. Almost 6.
Yeah. And when did you first come to North Carolina?
2005. So it's been and so now it's been 05 to 2010 and then back at the tail end of 2015.
Okay.
So it's been like
I feel
7
like
years.
2005 gives you're like a North Carolinian in the level that like you can complain about like the way it's changed at this point.
Sure. I don't complain about it, but
you're aware of it.
I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it brought me all the guys I was playing in a band with, Diarmid Edison, which became Bon Iver and Megaphone. Those guys all decided that they wanted to move to North Carolina. I was like kind of seeing if I could live in New York City at that time, but really having an awful time. This is like post-college. And I went to college in Vermont and they had all stayed in Wisconsin. So they were kind of like a unit, and they like called me to like come move to North Carolina with them basically. And a few other friends that weren't playing in the band.
There's a ton of Wisconsin folks.
Yeah.
Here now.
Well, yeah. And then Nick
Nick
Sanborn, came later.
Yeah.
But
and like
started playing in Megaphone, and then like Sylvanesso happened like right. I mean, it kind of happened before that because they collaborated.
Yeah. It's funny because that Wisconsin transplant situation is like in a roundabout way, like many times removed, but in a roundabout way, it's like why I live here.
Right.
Because it ended up, down the line, like all these different connections that, it made sense for me to come here when I was looking for a new place to live. But yeah, I mean, I have my feelings about North Carolina or about this scene. Like, I think I feel like all the musicians I know who live here don't ever want to leave.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, maybe I'm speaking out of turn.
No,
but
I mean,
everybody wants to be here if they're musicians, and it's like the scene is just like so supportive in that way.
Yeah, it's an amazing combination of supportive and robust.
Right.
Which is something I haven't experienced anywhere else.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
To me, I think like, it kind of pulls together, like we were talking about like connecting with people and how we all do, have our foot in like song-based music, and then we're also interested in doing this like more improvised, and experimental, for lack of a better word, type process of making music. And I think that there's something about here that lends itself. I don't know if it's location, but it's like the type of people that ended up here, that we're all sort of somehow like drawn, even though it happened at different times, but it's like, I mean, we're in the same time on the speck of dust that is the universe.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Johanna Samuels, Jen Wasner, Andy Stack, Jay Hammond, and Joe Westerlund for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform, and check out all the goodness at talkhouse.com. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.